What's up, everybody? We are back. Finally, by the way, first time in the new studio. It's actually the old studio. I just haven't set it up this way before. This is the plan. We got some other shit going on in here, but yeah, we're back. I don't know what this podcast is gonna look like at the next year. It's kind of stopped growing. And that's fine. Alex has left, so it's like a little bit of what used to be a shared workload is all on me. By the way, this is my dog. This is Lainey, after Elaine Bennis from Seinfeld. Lainey, she doesn't want to stick her head up. Um, yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what the podcast looks like in the long term. I got ideas. I got plans, but no promises. I am gonna start another podcast in this space, a one-on, like an in-person podcast. That was actually, I think, the charm of this podcast for me when we first. By the way, I just look so fucking fat on camera, and I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna try to make it better next year. That's one of my goals. In fact, let's see if we can turn this camera just slightly. Oh, this is gonna be bad. Oh, no, no, not quite. Let's center us up in frame though. About right there. Okay. All right, that's good enough for me. Oh my god, just so fucking fat in frame. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it's not. I would not call the podcast dead, but I would not call it thriving. I would say, um, we'll see. I don't think many of you are gonna miss it. I think that's the thing. I think that, like, and by the way, I'm not done podcasting. It's just part of the deal with this. It was really fun to get Alex and I together in the podcast studio in person. That was the conceit of this podcast, was that after COVID and all that stuff, it was so much more fun to do a podcast in person. And when we started it, we knew Alex was going to have a kid, and we knew that it was going to create some changes. He anticipated wanting to do a podcast still in person once a week, and I have we done it in person since his kid was born? I don't think so. Maybe we did. Maybe we did one. No, I don't think so. I think because I went to his house. That was in June, right before my kid was born. Was it? I can't remember if his kid's older than mine. Yeah, his kid's got to be younger than mine, right? Yeah, that's right. So, anyways, we this, by the way, nobody cares about this at all. So we'll see. We'll see how this shakes out. This is not a cocktail, by the way. This is water in a tumbler. It'll be a big ass cocktail. That's another thing, by the way. I'm like deep in the throes of holiday drunkenness. And not even like, I would say I'm not even like getting drunk on a regular basis. I'm just drinking so much as like the ritual. I love the ritual of holiday drinking. Um, that like, oh man, gotta cut it back. Gotta dry out a little bit. Gotta walk this broad. Gotta do. Yeah, it's a problem. We got problems over here in this house. Anyways, I wasn't here last week because I was losing my voice. I'm as you know loyal listeners to this podcast will know, I'm sick almost constantly. These two children just are. I'm just in a cycle of constant. My wife's a teacher. I'm just in a constant cycle of illness, leaving and then re-entering my body in a different form. And I was a little bit like scratchy on over the weekend, and I had only one comedy show this week, but it was this Make Me Famous show. That was last week, I should say. This Make Me Famous show at Tacoma Comedy Club, and I wanted to keep my voice up for that. And I still, as it was without doing this podcast, I only made it through the first show because two things. I didn't want to fuck up my voice completely. I didn't want to like completely lose it for. I've had it be gone for like a month. And in fact, on this podcast, we missed multiple weeks because of my voice being out. And then even after that, it was like a couple weeks where it still wasn't great. And so I wanted to avoid that. And I think I think I'm in good shape. I have a couple gigs I'm gonna have a bunch of gigs this weekend. So, Everett Improv, the Everett Improv Theater or whatever it's called. I don't know. It's the Everett Improv. but it's not associated with like the improv comedy clubs. Um, I'll be there on Friday, and then I have a private gig in Coeur d'Alene on Saturday, and then on Sunday I will be recording a set before Gabe Rutledge, friend of the podcast, who will be doing a crowdwork special at Tacoma Comedy Club. I'll be there doing material, so come and check that out. It's going to be fun. There's going to be so many goddamn cameras in the house, so come check that out, please. Yeah. Anyways, we've had a lot of sports news, I would say, in the last couple of weeks, and we'll start out with the Seahawks. Since I recorded a podcast, are 2-0. They beat the 49ers in cinematic fashion. That it seems amazing that it was 2 weeks ago, but with Geno Smith rushing for the game-winning touchdown at the end of the game, driving the Seahawks down. Uh, did we talk about this? Now I'm feeling like you do have to add the caveat in, like Brock Purdy gets hurt, Nick Bosa gets hurt, George Kittle doesn't play, Christian McCaffrey is diminished, and you do all that, recalculation in your mind of what that win actually means. Doesn't matter. It's a win in the scorebook, as people who are stupider than me say sometimes. And then they go out and they win again in, I don't know, is it convincing form? Is it not convincing form? They played the defense is really rounding out, and it seems like the Seahawks cannot play a complete game on both sides of the ball. And I'm starting to hear the calls for Ryan Grubb to be fired as the Seahawks offensive coordinator. I want to know your opinion, by the way. Send your comments, because to me it seems, one, it does seem insane to me to move on from a guy who you thought was potentially one of the sport's great innovators. After 1 year, he's a guy who's coached offensive line, who brought Scott Huff with him, and they've kind of pieced together this offensive line without a lot of budget. So, like, in one way, you can certainly blame the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach for not having a great offensive line. But when you're like, Charles Cross wasn't really their acquisition, and Laken Tomlinson was a guy that was just kind of available at the end of free agency, and similar story with Connor Williams, and then Connor Williams retires, which is really not their fault. And then they draft Christian Haynes, which I think you can blame them in the front office for drafting Christian Haynes, and how much you put on Grubb and Huff. I don't know. I will say I follow the draft pretty closely, and that draft pick was like pretty just universally loved. People were amazed that Haynes lasted that long, and so to me, it just doesn't seem realistic to move on from these two guys, from Huff and from Grubb, especially in a year, by the way, that's like not disastrous. It's not like the season has been disastrous or the offense has been disastrous. In fact, like, I was looking at some advanced metrics because I was just curious when I started to see these things. The Seahawks offense is about average. So if their offense is about average and the offensive line was kind of like, the coaching staff got put together at the last minute, which means they were potentially late on free agents, and they didn't make a ton of investment in the offensive line in free agency, and they didn't invest super high in the draft, a third round pick being the highest pick. And then some of these guys have like kind of worked out, like LeMaya played the other day in place of Christian Haynes, by the way, which again, like I recognize that's potentially a bad draft pick on their part. Abraham Lucas came back and solidified the right side. But again, it's like they've had the similar disadvantages to what the previous regime had, and only one season to rectify those problems. I'm pretty inclined to, and I will admit, like, I'm a Ryan Grubb fan. It's possible I'm a Scott Huff fan, but largely because of what they did with the Washington Huskies. It's possible that being a homer has infected my brain on this a little bit, but I don't really think it has. I think these dudes, especially I think Grubb, is like one of the more innovative coaches in all of football. And I do think it's possible, and I think I said this at the time, and I could be wrong, but I thought I said it at the time, that it was possible he would face some of the same challenges that Chip Kelly had, where it was like, when Chip Kelly was at Oregon, he had a roster that was like 85 dudes deep or whatever, maybe more than that. And he didn't have to worry about having like fresh legs on his receivers. He would just keep pumping in 4 and 5 star recruits. He also, by the way, didn't fuck with the transfer portal at the time. Just pumping in 4 and 5 star recruits, getting fresh legs in, and constantly just challenging the pace of the game for the defense. And you can't really do that with 53-man roster. I think 47 active on game day. You just can't. You can't do that in the same way because you just don't have the personnel to just be constantly running up tempo. And that same offensive line that has all these same problems, of course, those could be exacerbated if these guys are, you know, having their cardio challenged, etc. So it's the reality. It's why NFL teams don't really run up tempo constantly, especially not at the rate that the college teams do. And then whatever you think about Geno Smith, do you think Geno Smith is a top 10 quarterback? I think the bloom is probably off that rose for maybe even the people who are the most ardent Geno supporters. Is Geno an average starting quarterback? I think that's probably in the range that I would agree with. He's had some bad luck at points this year. He's played bad at points this year, but he was not a guy that was picked out by Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff. This is a guy who's like a holdover. You got to give these dudes, and McDonald is not, nobody's got Mike McDonald on the chopping block at this point, but you got to give these dudes an offseason, a full offseason, in my opinion, to like, let's assemble a crew. Let's assemble a squad, a team that is in the image of the coaches who will be coaching it before we throw these dudes to the side and assume that they're going to suck. That being said, like I think you could say the same thing. I remember when Jim Mora was the Seahawks head coach. I was thrilled they got rid of him after a year. And I was surprised. Him and Greg Knapp, it was just 1 year, right? Is that right? Jim Mora. Jim Mora. Is this more or less fun to watch me do this shit on a phone instead of hearing me typing on a computer? I guess is a question. Do you like this setup anymore? That's regular Jim Mora, not Jim Mora. I want Jim L. Mora. Give me that Jim L. Mora. Jim L. Mora. Did you coach 2 years in Seattle? No. 1 year. Yeah, he was DB's coach and assistant head coach, like the coach in waiting, which I'm so glad the Seahawks stopped doing that shit. That was so annoying. Didn't they have that? They had that with didn't they have that in Seattle or under Pete Carroll? They had another guy who was like the coach in waiting. Thank God. I mean, how many of those? I guess what's his name? Well, I suppose this could be a source of frustration for some fans, but my mind is just going to make me say Dan Lanning, but I know it's not Dan Lanning. The fucking dude in Washington. Why can't I think of his name? Oh my God, we're going to Google already again. Commanders head coach. I am so the other thing is another Dan Quinn. Another reason why I didn't record a podcast last week. My week was just absolutely fucking. Oh, is this, by the way? This is like I'm not trying to get the YouTube censors on my ass. This isn't too sexy for YouTube. This pose, is it? I've had just a hellish. We had on the Friday before Thanksgiving a new refrigerator, a new freezer delivered. Had to get all the food out of the other ones, jam it into some crates until the guys got the stuff out. We ended up keeping the old fridge. We're gonna make it our garage fridge eventually. And then we had my buddy Greg Beechler over, and he helped. Which, by the way, is it even since? It's got to be since I had an incident. I had an incident that I shared a video of where I got charged on stage that you can go find a video of, and on another podcast that I will be releasing soon. I talked about it in great detail. I got charged on stage, folks. I'm one of the bad boys of comedy now. Yeah, so Greg Beechler came over on Friday, and he and I installed a toilet, installed a garbage disposal, installed a bathroom fan. It was a busy Friday. The holidays, I I get off the rails. And then I got to drink about 7 drinks a night, all on top of all this productivity. It's not quite that much. It's more like I would say it's like 2 or 3 drinks every night, which is almost the worst kind of drinking because you're not drinking for effect. You're not drinking enough to be hungover to slow you down, just enough to maintain a lifestyle. I also think, by the way, I'm going to tell you this. I think these posters or these canvases look bad behind me. I thought they would look better. I think they look bad. They'll look good in another place in my life. I don't think they look good here, though. That's the honest truth. Um, so yeah, I don't think you should move on from those dudes. I'm starting to get onto the team, considering the rookie class of quarterbacks. That's like, don't don't assume you can or will replace Geno Smith in the offseason. Don't assume that Sam Howell is that guy either. So yeah, go draft a guy if someone's available. There's always quarterbacks. There's going to be somebody that's available that technically has an arm and has played quarterback. Is that going to be like a guy that really, is it in the first round? Is it someone who deserves a first round grade? Are you reaching for a quarterback? I would like to not see the Seahawks reach for a quarterback. And if they're not going to reach for a quarterback, this seems like a bad year to be looking for a quarterback in the draft because there's not less quarterback needy teams, really. There's just less supply. Um, yeah, but the defense is really coming into shape. The Leonard Williams obviously is the story of. By the way, Laney, you give him nothing. You're giving these people nothing. Come here. Hey. There we go. There's a head movement. Everyone just thinks she's dead. Um, Leonard Williams is playing out of his mind. Leonard Williams is playing like one of the most dominant defensive players in all of football, and that's, I mean, you got to be happy. I will say at the time the Seahawks traded for him, I was not thrilled. I don't know that there was a guy that I would have rather had in the second round this year, especially when you consider that there was no quarterbacks available, and they signed him to a somewhat reasonable extension in the offseason. This defensive line with him and Byron Murphy, and if you can get somebody in there to be like a true nose, a true zero technique, as the technique heads. I don't want to. Understanding, by the way, the amount of people that cite defensive line techniques that have any idea what they're talking about, the ratio is off, I would say. A true nose tackle, a guy that's 350 pounds, a Casey Hampton type. Um, you get a guy like that's like a real, not Jonathan Hankins, not a guy who was like organizational depth with the Cowboys, but a guy that's like a true contributor at that position. And I think you're like that run wall. The Ernest Jones trade looks great. Obviously, I think we've done a podcast since Terrell Dodson got released, but um, I was very happy with the Terrell Dodson signing. The Jerome Baker one also seemed promising in the offseason. Obviously, neither one of them worked out. And kudos to the Seahawks for being willing to move on from those things. But, I know this like runs contrary to what I said about moving on from Grubb. Although I think that Grubb is like, the offense is like about a league average offense. Whatever anger you have towards it, whatever ultimatums you have set in your mind about how they have to be able to handle short yardage situations, or how whatever blame you want to give Grubb for the red zone performance. It's a league average offense that's been a little bit unlucky, I think, but it's a league average offense. And a league average offense with a good defense is a playoff team, and I think what we're seeing is the Seahawks are probably going to be a playoff team. They were, not that long ago, there were some of these projection systems that had them at like a 6 or 10% chance of making the playoffs, all while being only one game out of the playoffs, and now they are probably a playoff team. Okay. The Huskies lost to Oregon, and I'm trying to think of what do they have a bye week before that? They're bowl eligible, 6-6. One, there's no conflict in my mind. I would like to see them take that bowl invitation. The idea that they would not take it to me is insane. It's kind of exactly what you thought was going to happen out of this season. By the end of the year, Damon Williams is your starter, starting against Oregon, presumably starting in the bowl game. Will Rogers loses that starting job, and yeah, I mean, I think that Jedd Fisch probably telegraphed that a little bit. He had promised playing time to Williams, and I think you thought that eventually it would be starting quarterback for this team. Did Williams show you enough to be excited? I would say I'm not like stoked at the idea of Damon Williams being the face of the Huskies in coming years as Jedd Fisch has described him. But I think like the nature of college football right now, and it'll probably eventually settle down, but is like not only do I not think that Damon Williams will necessarily be here 2 years from now, I don't know if Jedd Fisch is going to be here. I don't know who will be here. I don't know if a single person that is in that building right now will be there in 2 years. It's just the wild west of NIL and all that shit. So, yeah, we'll when the bowls get announced, which I don't think they have because we got to get through conference championship games. Uh, I am excited though. Have you allowed yourself to be excited at the prospect of the 12-team playoff? Whatever you feel about it, this is going to bring on an era of college football that includes a lot of great matchups in late December and early January, and that's exciting to me. Like, I understand not liking some of the other things about the expanded playoff or the playoff in general or NIL or the state of college football, but the idea of, you know, 3 rounds of premier matchups, is that right? It goes 12-8, 8-4, 4-2, 4 rounds of premier matchups at the end of the college football season after everything's been decided. It's not some early season matchup where we thought Michigan was good and it turns out Michigan isn't good or whatever. These are 12 very compelling teams in the playoffs. And we got to watch. I mean, Alabama's probably going to get in as a 3-loss team. What does DeBoer look like, by the way? And I'm still curious to find out how you all feel. If you're Huskies fans, would you take DeBoer back at Washington right now? If you could wipe the slate clean and take him back, not pay his buyout at Alabama, not pay Fisch's buyout if you fired him, would you take Kalen DeBoer back right now? Because I would. Absolutely I would. But it has been gratifying to watch him struggle. At Alabama, obviously. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was uh, the Michigan Ohio State. Michigan upsets Ohio State in Columbus, and then after the game, the Michigan players, plant their flag at the 50-yard line in Ohio State, and it creates this fight, and players get pepper sprayed, and it's this, in my opinion, just completely unnecessary controversy. Like first off, to me, the planting the flag thing, I feel very similar about it as I do towards like the turnover chain or the post home run celebration that it seems like every team has now. The Mariners have the Trident, and I know that people in Seattle love the Trident, but people in Seattle also love the Wave. So I don't know if this is like the fact that people like it doesn't necessarily justify its existence. And what I will say is I find this whole situation where teams have to do this big demonstrative celebration after the game and they're kind of all doing what everyone else is doing, it's so goddamn embarrassing. It's so stupid that every team is just taking cues from each other. I was thinking about this recently because I have a friend who she always adopts the like cool new slang. the modern colloquialisms. And it was interesting because I have always in my life been resistant to the idea. Like, there's a few things that'll slip in that I find like are just like you can't argue this is like a perfect. I remember the first time I heard of a dude getting oral sex called knowledge or dome or brain. I was like, oh, that's like what a great artistic way of, because it was getting head before. It was like, I mean, I was probably 19, but I used to have a buddy, or I still have a buddy, but I have a buddy that lives in Atlanta that used to live out here. And he would give me, he's cool black guy, and he would give me all the new slang before it hit white people on the West Coast. And I had the opportunity very often to like decide if I was going to adopt that slang before other people did. And most of the time I didn't. The ones that the one that I'm like the most upset that I can't bring myself to adopt is when people say keep that same energy. Just a perfect depiction of how I feel about people being hypocrites. And but my friend, I was talking to her about how I was like, why do you have to like everything, let him cook and cap and all this bullshit that like I feel like a very old white guy right now, but it's just inauthentic to me to use these terms. And she said it's just the evolution of language. And for a moment I accepted it, and then I realized the reason I don't do these things is because I bristle at the idea of being an appropriator of culture, and I don't just mean racial cultures. I mean this thing. It's just so embarrassing to pretend like you're like young, basically. It's so unoriginal. It's so inauthentic. It's the let him cook one. Like, again, it's fine. But like when you're, whoever, like, and not her, but as an example, if you're Mina Kimes or Mike Golick Jr. or somebody like that, that's like, you're so desperately trying to cling to relevance. And it's not because those people are bad. I think Mina Kimes does a very good job. Not super aware of Mike Golick Jr.'s work to know how great he is. But it is like show business, quote unquote show business, but especially something like that where you're like, how much are you actually creating if you're Mina Kimes? How much are you creating if you're Mike Golick Jr.? Like, so you just have to be like interesting and compelling. And the way to do that is the way some people choose to do that is to seem hip, to seem cool, to seem like somebody that the audience would want to hang out with. I heard shit. I should have written it down at the time, but there was a comedian that I heard talking about how the persona that you want to have is not somebody that is like, I want to hang out with. That's good, but it only lasts so long. It's when somebody sees you and they go, that person would love hanging out with me. And that's like, I think like people see Mina Kimes and the way Mina Kimes handles public media and handles, the way she has a ton of critics online and the way she handles them. They go like, oh, me and Mina Kimes could be friends. And similar to like I think that's the way people view Dave Portnoy also. And I guess I'm just like, I have an aversion to like trying to be something I'm not so that people will like me more. I've said this about comedy for a long time. Like, I do the comedy that I like. I do the comedy that I want to do because I'm really good at making money doing stuff that I don't want to do, that I don't like doing. I'm never going to make comedy be a thing that I don't like doing by bastardizing the material, right? If I stop liking doing this podcast, which points in the last couple of weeks, you could argue I have, I'm not doing it anymore because I don't have to. Especially the podcast, like, does not make any money. Stand up, I make money, but it's like I could use I spend a lot of time and effort and energy on stand-up. And if it didn't make money, and if it didn't fulfill me in other ways, like, absolutely I could afford to quit doing stand-up. Now, someday that's hopefully not going to be true. Someday I will be able to focus on one of these things, or to focus, to be able to make a full living off of just stand-up comedy, and that'd be great. But I will not get there by becoming a crowd work comic, for example. I like crowd work. I think it's fine. I think it's very fun, in fact. And in fact, by the way, I did a crowd work show at Tacoma Comedy Club called Surrounded. And I'm going to be posting a full set of that probably next week. So check out Casey McLean Comedy on YouTube. But my point is this thing, this like copycat celebration. It used to be this very rare disrespect, and now what are we going to have? Like, these universities are going to have to put security guards around midfield so that the players don't, like, plant a flag, and so the players don't fight each other, so that the police don't have to pepper spray people. What is this going to have to escalate to? I mean, can it escalate even further? At this point, we're like at the edge of even, we're beyond where you could have even imagined the stupidest possible outcome of these celebrations. And yeah, if I'm Michigan, or if I'm a Michigan fan, am I mad at my players for play? It's on Michigan. That's my opinion. It's on Michigan. Ohio State, I'm not mad at, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm not mad at them for fighting Michigan. In fact, it's a very violent game. So if they're going to disrespect you, you've been violent and shit-talking for a lot less than that. So absolutely Ohio State should be, like, doing what they're doing. Or at least that's the... But can we move on from it? Can we move on from this copycat, unoriginal, embarrassing celebration? Can you find something new? Do you remember the first time... is it University of Miami that has the turnover chain? You remember the first time you saw that? And you were like, that's so fucking cool. This big diamond encrusted chain. It probably wasn't diamond encrusted, but this big chain that these guys, like Ohio State has the stickers on the helmet. That's so fucking cool. But when you see like every team start to do it and it becomes corporatized, it sucks. And I feel that way about the flag planting. It's like we've reached the peak. We've planted the flag at the peak. Let's move on from it. We don't need that in every goddamn weekend. We don't need to fight in every game. And frankly, put the punishment on the coaches then. I think that'll solve it. I think the NCAA and the network secretly like it. I think that's the reason why there hasn't been anything done about it. We'll see. I think there'll be pressure this offseason. All right, Everett Improv, if you live out that way, on Friday, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, private event. You can't come. Hopefully I don't get stuck on the pass, because that's on Saturday, and on Sunday I'm at Tacoma Comedy Club for the Make Me Famous show at Tacoma Comedy Club. The Make Me Famous taping before the Gabe Rutledge taping, so come check that out. Thank you all for listening. If I keep doing the podcast, I will see you